March 9, 1945, Remagen, Germany. Lieutenant Colonel David Pergrin stared at blueprints that called for something every engineer knew was impossible. Build a 1,032-foot tactical bridge across the Rhine River in 32 hours, while German artillery obliterated everything in sight. His 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had just survived the Battle of the Bulge by blowing bridges in Joachim Peiper's face. Now they had to build one under conditions that would kill them. The Rhine flowed at 7 miles per hour. German artillery observers on the hills could see every pontoon, every steel treadway section, every engineer. The damaged Ludendorff Bridge, captured intact just 2 days earlier, was already sagging, hit 24 times by shells, a 15-foot hole blasted in its deck. It would collapse in 8 days, killing 28 engineers. Pergrin's battalion had to finish before that happened. Over the next 32 hours, his men would prove that American combat engineers could accomplish in 10 days what took Julius Caesar a month, and do it while being shot at. The Rhine wasn't just a river, it was Germany's last natural fortress, 890 feet wide at Remagen, moving like a freight train. For 2,000 years, it had stopped armies. Napoleon crossed it in 1805, the first invading force since Roman times. Now, in March 1945, it was the final barrier protecting Germany's industrial heartland, the Ruhr Valley. Allied planners had spent months preparing Operation Plunder. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's massive set-piece crossing, scheduled for March 23rd, 22,000 tons of bridging equipment, 8,000 Royal Engineers, 4,000 artillery pieces for the opening bombardment. The plan assumed every bridge would be destroyed, every crossing contested. Hitler's scorched earth policy, the Nero Decree, demanded it. Every bridge, every tunnel, every factory that could aid the Allies must be destroyed. By March 6, 1945, the policy had worked. Every bridge across the Rhine had been dropped into the river. Cologne's Hohenzollern Bridge, demolished on March 6th, just hours before American troops arrived. The bridge at Bonn, destroyed. Bridges at Koblenz, Mainz, Mannheim, all gone. The Rhine had become an 890-foot-wide moat protecting the Third Reich. Then on March 7th, scouts from the U.S. 9th Armored Division crested a hill overlooking Remagen and saw something that shouldn't exist. The Ludendorff Bridge, still standing. German Captain Willy Bratge, the combat commander responsible for the bridge's defense, had 36 men to hold it. Most were convalescents, recovering from wounds. A handful of engineers, some Hitler Youth, 200 Volkssturm militia. Major Hans Scheller arrived at 11:15 hours with orders to take command, but no reinforcements. German engineers tried to blow the bridge at 15:20 hours. They pressed the electrical detonator. Nothing happened. Artillery had severed the cable. Corporal Anton Faust ran onto the bridge under American fire and lit the manual backup fuse. The charges detonated. The bridge shook, rose 6 feet in the air, and settled back onto its foundations. Only 1 of 3 charges had fired. The rest used inadequate civilian-grade Donnerite explosives instead of military TNT, a consequence of Hitler's own orders after an accidental bridge demolition in Cologne the previous October. And those Russian prisoners of war who built it during World War I had constructed it too well. Within minutes, Lieutenant Karl Timmermann led Company A, 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, across the span under machine gun fire. Combat engineers frantically cut demolition wires, removed unexploded charges. Sergeant Alex Drabik became the first American soldier to reach the east bank of the Rhine. By nightfall on March 7th, 8,000 American troops occupied the east bank. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, saw the opportunity immediately. He telephoned General Omar Bradley. "How much have you got in that immediate area that you can throw across?" Bradley committed everything within reach: get 5 divisions across, establish a bridgehead, threaten the Ruhr. But there was a problem that engineering reports made clear. The Ludendorff Bridge was dying. The bridge's death was visible, measurable, inevitable. Built during World War I between 1916 and 1919, the Ludendorff Bridge had cost 2.1 million marks and weighed 4,640 tons. It consisted of a steel lattice arch spanning 1,066 feet, with an overall length of 1,306 feet, including approaches. The arch rose 94 feet above the Rhine at its highest point. The deck normally sat 48 feet above the water. Designed to carry 2 railway lines and pedestrian walkways, it could handle enormous loads, when intact. But it wasn't intact anymore. Months of Allied bombing raids had weakened structural members. A raid in February 1945 had scored near misses that cracked concrete piers. The partial demolition on March 7th had severed critical tension cables. Now, American engineers inspecting the structure found stress fractures propagating through load-bearing members. By March 8th, German artillery had hit the bridge 24 times. Each impact weakened the structure further. On March 9th, a German shell struck an ammunition truck crossing the bridge. The explosion blew a 15-foot hole in the deck, putting the bridge out of service for hours while engineers jury-rigged repairs. On March 10th at noon, another shell hit a gasoline truck. The fireball was visible for miles. For 2 days, all fuel and ammunition convoys were diverted to ferries. But ferries were slow, vulnerable. By March 12th, the bridge had sagged 6 to 12 inches, visible to the naked eye. Engineers shoring up the structure reported hearing metal groaning under load. Stress calculations showed the bridge had perhaps 72 hours remaining before catastrophic failure. Meanwhile, the bridgehead's logistics demands were staggering. 5 divisions, approximately 60,000 men, needed supplies. Each division consumed 500 tons of supplies per day. That's 2,500 tons daily across one dying bridge. Ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies, spare parts, mail. Plus reinforcements, another 2,000 troops per day. Plus casualties evacuated west, 100 per day. All on a bridge that structural engineers predicted would fail imminently. The mathematics were clear. One bridge couldn't sustain the operation. They needed more bridges. Fast. The call went out at 0200 hours on March 9th. Every available engineer unit within 1st Army's area converge on Remagen. The 51st Engineer Combat Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Harvey Fraser. The 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel David Pergrin. The 998th Treadway Bridge Company. The 988th Treadway Bridge Company. The 181st Engineer Heavy Pontoon Battalion. The 552nd Engineer Heavy Pontoon Battalion. All ordered to build tactical bridges across the Rhine. Now, Colonel H. Wallace Anderson, commanding the 1111th Engineer Combat Group, assigned missions. The 51st would build a Class 40 heavy pontoon bridge 2 miles upstream, between Kripp and Linz. The 291st would build a Class 40 M2 steel treadway bridge 400 meters downstream from the Ludendorff Bridge. Both bridges had to be operational within 48 hours. Pergrin received his orders at 0230 hours. He was at the 291st's bivouac near Malmedy, Belgium, 60 miles from Remagen. His battalion had been there since January, recovering from the Battle of the Bulge. They'd earned a presidential citation for their performance in the Ardennes, where they'd stopped the 1st SS Panzer Division by systematically blowing every bridge Joachim Peiper needed. Peiper's enraged scream, "Dies verdammten Pionier!" Those damned engineers had become the battalion's unofficial motto, but the Bulge had cost them. Of 650 men, they'd taken 93 wounded and 8 killed. They'd spent January excavating the frozen bodies of 86 American soldiers massacred at Malmedy. They were exhausted, traumatized. Now First Army wanted them to build the first tactical bridge across the Rhine. Pergrin gathered his company commanders, Captain James Gamble, Company A, Captain John Conlin, Company B, Captain Lawrence Moyer, Company C. He spread the blueprints across a table. "We're building an M2 treadway bridge across the Rhine at Remagen," he said. 890 feet of fast water. German artillery has direct observation. The Luftwaffe will try to bomb us. We start at 00:08:30 tomorrow morning. The captains studied the plans. Captain Gamble spoke first. "Sir, standard doctrine says 362 feet of M2 treadway takes 5.5 hours in daylight under ideal conditions. We're building 1,032 feet under artillery fire. That's 32 hours," Pergrin interrupted. "If we're fast, if we're lucky. If the Germans don't kill too many of us." He paused. "The 998th Treadway Bridge Company is bringing equipment up from 1st French Army. They'll arrive at 800. We start construction at 8:30. Questions?" Captain Moyer raised his hand. "Casualties, sir." Pergrin looked at him. "Doctrine assumes 0 casualties. We'll take casualties. How many depends on German artillery accuracy." He didn't say the rest, that everyone in the room knew the 291st's reputation meant they'd been chosen because they could sustain casualties and keep working. "Load the trucks," Pergrin said. "We move at 0500. The convoy departed Malmedy at 05:15 hours on March 9th. 35 trucks carrying 620 men of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion. They drove through the pre-dawn darkness, through the Ardennes forest, where they'd fought in December, across the German border at Aachen. By 07:30 hours, they reached Remagen. The town was chaos, thousands of troops, hundreds of vehicles, all converging on the 2 small roads leading to the Rhine. The approaches to the Ludendorff Bridge were backed up for miles. Trucks with trailers, tanks on transporters, artillery pieces towed behind prime movers, ammunition trucks, supply convoys, ambulances evacuating wounded. The 291st's convoy detoured south toward the construction site 400 meters downstream from the bridge. Pergrin climbed out of his jeep and walked to the riverbank. The Rhine was everything the report said. 890 feet wide, moving at 7 miles per hour. Grey-brown water, carrying debris from upstream, logs, branches, pieces of destroyed bridges. The current was vicious, powerful enough to sweep away anything not properly anchored. Water temperature, 45 degrees Fahrenheit. A man in that water had 15 minutes before hypothermia. Across the river, Erpel rose 490 feet, a steep wooded hill with German artillery observers at the summit. From that position, they could see everything. Every truck, every pontoon, every engineer. As Pergrin watched, a German 105mm shell screamed over the river and detonated 200 yards south of his position. Another ranging shot. They'd have this area zeroed in within the hour. At 800 hours, the 998th Treadway Bridge Company arrived with equipment. 25 GMC CCKW trucks loaded with steel treadway sections. 18 Brockway B666 bridge erector trucks, massive 6-wheel drive vehicles with hydraulic hoists. 3 GMC trucks with Leroy compressors for inflating pontoons. 2 18-foot wooden power utility boats with outboard motors. And the pontoons themselves, 86 of them, rolled up like giant sleeping bags. Each pontoon was 33 feet long, 8 feet wide, 33 inches deep when inflated. Each weighed 975 pounds deflated. Made of rubberized canvas, separated into 12 airtight compartments by bulkheads. If one compartment failed, 11 remained functional. The design was brilliant, portable, relatively lightweight. capable of supporting 18 tons when inflated. But they had to be inflated on shore, then moved into the river, a process that made them vulnerable to artillery fire. At 8:30 hours, Pergrin gave the order. Start inflation. Company A, West Bank approach and first 300 feet. Company B, middle 400 feet. Company C, coordinate with East Bank team for final 332 feet. And gentlemen, he added, the Germans will shoot at us. Work fast. The first pontoon went into inflation at 08:35 hours. A GMC truck with a Leroy compressor backed up to the rolled pontoon. 2 engineers connected air hoses to the inflation valves. The compressor roared to life, pumping air at high pressure. The pontoon began to swell, rubberized canvas expanding, taking shape. That's when the first German shell arrived. It screamed over the river with that distinctive freight train sound and detonated 50 yards from the inflation area. The explosion threw up a geyser of dirt and stone. Shrapnel whined through the air, pinging off truck chassis, thudding into sandbags. Men hit the ground instinctively. Pergrin remained standing, watching the hill across the river. He'd seen German artillery work before in North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, the Bulge. That was a ranging shot, deliberately short. The next round would be closer as the observer walked fire toward the target. Keep inflating, Pergrin shouted. We don't stop for artillery. The compressor kept running. The pontoon continued inflating, growing like some massive grey whale, 33 feet long, 8 feet wide. Engineers gathered around it, waiting. Second shell. Closer, 70 yards. The forward observer on Repelled was good, adjusting fire with precision. Third shell, 40 yards. Too close. Dirt rained down on the engineers. Get that pontoon in the water, Pergrin ordered. Now! A 10-man team grabbed the inflated pontoon, now weighing over 1,000 pounds, and manhandled it toward the river. They'd practiced this at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, on calm training ponds with gentle currents. The Rhine at Remagen wasn't a calm training pond. The moment the pontoon touched water, the current grabbed it like a living thing, trying to rip it downstream at 7 miles per hour. Engineers waded in, water immediately soaking through boots, rising to their thighs. 45-degree water, shockingly cold, muscle-cramping cold. They fought the current, holding ropes attached to the pontoon's bow and stern. One of the 18-foot power utility boats roared up, its Evinrude outboard motor screaming at full throttle. The crew grabbed the bowline and began towing the pontoon upstream, fighting the current, positioning it where the first treadway section would connect. Fourth shell, direct hit on the inflation area. The explosion was catastrophic. Private First Class Robert J. Martinez, 22 years old, from Laredo, Texas, was killed instantly, vaporized by the blast. 5 more engineers went down, shrapnel tearing through flesh. Corporal James Henderson, shrapnel through the thigh, femoral artery nicked, bleeding heavily. Private William O'Brien, shrapnel through the shoulder and arm, compound fracture. Private Anthony DeMarco, shrapnel across the back, multiple penetrating wounds. Private Thomas Kelly, concussion from blast, eardrums ruptured. Private Lawrence Mitchell, shrapnel through the abdomen, intestines perforated. Medics sprinted forward, medical bags bouncing. They worked with practiced efficiency, tourniquets, pressure bandages, morphine syrettes. Pergrin watched medics load wounded onto litters, carry them to ambulances. 1 dead, 5 wounded. They'd been working for 30 minutes. He did the quick calculation. At this casualty rate, they'd lose 50 men before the bridge was half built. But stopping wasn't an option. He looked at the engineers standing frozen, staring at the blood-soaked ground where Martinez had been standing. Inflate the next pontoon, Pergrin said, his voice hard. We're not stopping. The rhythm of construction was brutal, mechanical, lethal. Inflate pontoons while under artillery fire. 3 minutes per pontoon with the compressor running full power. Get them into the water before shells destroyed them. Fight the 7-mile-per-hour current to position them. Drop 100-pound kedge anchors 100 feet upstream. Anchor cables angling back to hold pontoons against the current. Connect steel treadway sections to the pontoons using connector saddles. U-shaped steel brackets that lock the treadway to the pontoon. Pin adjacent treadway sections together with steel connector pins driven through aligned holes. Build outward from the west bank, section by section, 12 feet at a time. German artillery arrived every 3 to 4 minutes. Not random fire, carefully observed, precisely adjusted. The German artillery observer on Repelled could see everything. Every time a pontoon entered the water, he called a fire mission. Every time a treadway section lifted off a truck, he adjusted fire. The shells were 105mm high explosive, probably from a battery of German Leff-18 howitzers positioned 3 to 5 miles east of the Rhine. Each shell carried approximately 3 pounds of high explosive and produced a fragmentation radius of 30 meters. Direct hit. Death. Within 10 meters, severe wounds. Within 30 meters, wounds from fragments. The engineers learned to recognize the sound. That freight train scream meant a shell inbound. 5 seconds to hit the ground. The engineers worked anyway. By 1,000 hours, 3 pontoons were in the water, anchored, with treadway sections connecting them. 36 feet of bridge extending from the west bank. German artillery had delivered 15 shells. Casualties, 7 wounded, 1 dead. The section where pontoons connected to treadways, called Suicide Point by the engineers, was living up to its name. It was the most exposed position, impossible to conceal, vulnerable from 3 directions. Engineers had to stand on partially completed treadways, lean over the river, guide pontoons into position while the current fought them. All while German machine guns on Repelled intermittently fired, bullets kicking up waterspouts. At 1145 hours, the 291st had pushed 120 feet of bridge into the Rhine. That's when the Luftwaffe arrived for the first time. 10 Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, obsolete aircraft, but still deadly. They came in from the east, diving at steep angles, sirens screaming, releasing 500-pound bombs. The engineers kept working. They had no choice. Above them, American anti-aircraft batteries erupted. The 482nd Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion had positioned 3 batteries around Remagen. 18 90mm anti-aircraft guns firing proximity-fused shells. 36 40mm Bofors guns firing streams of tracers. Dozens of 50-caliber machine guns stitching patterns across the sky. The sky became a cauldron of explosions, tracers, falling aircraft. 8 Stukas were shot down in 5 minutes. 2 more limped away, trailing smoke. But 2 bombs hit near the construction site. 1 detonated in the river, 50 feet from the bridge. The water erupted, a column of water and spray 100 feet high. The blast waves slammed into the partially completed bridge, bending treadway sections, knocking 2 engineers off the structure into the Rhine. Both men went under immediately, dragged down by heavy boots and equipment. Downstream, engineers working on anchor cables saw them surface 50 yards away, flailing. Corporal Michael Russo dove off the bank, swimming hard against the current. He reached Private Dennis McCarthy first, grabbed his collar, fought back toward shore. Other engineers formed a human chain, wading into the river, hands linked. Russo reached them, passed McCarthy up the chain. He went back for the second man, Private Frank Delgado. But Delgado had already gone under, swept downstream by the current, lungs full of 45-degree Rhine water. His body was never recovered. At 1300 hours, with 6 hours of work completed, the bridge extended 200 feet from the west bank. Casualties, 12 wounded, 2 dead. German artillery had found perfect range. Shells were now arriving every 2 to 3 minutes, bracketing the construction site with methodical precision. Then came the direct hit that everyone had been dreading. At 13:15 hours, a German 105mm shell struck Suicide Point directly. The explosion obliterated a 12-foot section of treadway, vaporized the pontoon beneath it. Private Raymond Thompson, 19 years old, from Gary, Indiana, was standing on that section. He ceased to exist. 5 more engineers were wounded, 2 critically. Private Joseph Kowalski, shrapnel through the chest, penetrating the right lung, sucking chest wound. Sergeant Patrick O'Reilly, shrapnel through the abdomen, liver lacerated, internal bleeding. Both were evacuated immediately. Both would survive, but both would spend months in hospitals. The damaged bridge section threatened the entire structure. Twisted treadway was pulling adjacent sections, threatening to cascade the failure. Engineers swarmed the damage point with cutting torches, hacksaws, brute force. They cut away twisted metal, dropped a new treadway section, connected it, kept building. Repair time, 22 minutes. Captain Gamble, supervising the repair, looked at Pergrin. "Sir, we're taking casualties faster than we're making progress." Pergrin nodded. "We keep building, the bridge across, or we don't stop." By 1700 hours, as March daylight faded, the 291st had pushed 300 feet of bridge into the Rhine. 1/3 complete. Casualties, 17 wounded, 2 dead. The mathematics were grim but simple. They'd sustained 19 casualties to build 300 feet. That's 1 casualty every 16 feet of bridge. To complete the remaining 732 feet would require approximately 45 more casualties. Pergrin ordered his companies to work through the night in shifts. 12 hours on, 12 hours off. Rotating constantly, it would slow construction slightly, but it would spread casualties across more men, reduce the chance of entire platoons being wiped out. As darkness fell, the work became harder, more dangerous. Blackout conditions meant no lights except shielded lanterns at the connection points. Engineers worked by feel, connecting treadways in near-total darkness. The river became invisible, just the sound of rushing water and occasional white water visible in starlight. German artillery continued, now firing on sound cues, the clang of steel on steel as treadways connected. The whine of outboard motors positioning pontoons, the shouted orders of sergeants directing crews, each sound drew fire within minutes. But then, at 0200 hours on March 10th, disaster nearly destroyed everything. 400 meters upstream, the Ludendorff Bridge, stressed beyond its limits, partially collapsed. Not the entire structure, but a 30-foot section of decking that had been weakened by repeated artillery hits and the ammunition truck explosion. The section gave way with a sound like a cannon shot. Steel beams, concrete chunks, wood planking, tons of debris plunged into the Rhine. The current grabbed it, swept it downstream at 7 miles per hour, straight toward the 291st's partially completed bridge. Engineers working on the structure heard it coming, a rumbling, grinding sound in the darkness. Then someone screamed, "Debris!" Coming downstream. The engineers on Suicide Point had perhaps 10 seconds. Some dove off the bridge toward the west bank. Some dove toward the east bank, into deeper water. Some froze, paralyzed by darkness and fear. The debris hit the partially completed bridge like a battering ram. Steel beams weighing tons slammed into pontoons, puncturing compartments, sinking them. Concrete chunks smashed treadway sections, bending them beyond repair. wood planking tangled in anchor cables, dragging pontoons downstream, and 18 engineers who'd been working on the forward sections went into the Rhine. The water was 45 degrees, pitch black, moving at 7 miles per hour. Some men surfaced immediately, shouting, flailing. Some went under, dragged down by boots and equipment, and never came up. Downstream, engineers heard the shouts and reacted instantly. Men sprinted along the riverbank, following the voices. Others grabbed ropes, life preservers, anything that floated. Some, without hesitation, dove into 45-degree water and swam toward drowning comrades. Corporal Michael Russo, already a hero from rescuing McCarthy earlier, dove in again. He reached Private First Class Donald Hayes, who was going under, weighed down by waterlogged uniform and combat boots. Russo stripped Hayes's boots off underwater, grabbed his collar, swam him to shore. Sergeant William Morrison formed a human chain of engineers wading into the river, arms linked. They pulled 4 men to safety. Lieutenant Edward Hartley commandeered one of the power utility boats, roared downstream at full throttle, engine screaming. He found 3 engineers clinging to a floating log 200 yards downstream. He pulled them aboard, went back for more. Through desperate effort and courage, they saved 16 of the 18, but 2 men were lost. Corporal James Mitchell, 24 years old, from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Private Anthony DeLuca, 21 years old, from Brooklyn, New York. Both swept downstream, both drowned in the Rhine's icy current. Their bodies were never recovered. 40 miles downstream, somewhere between Remagen and Koblenz, the Rhine gave up their remains to German farmers who buried them in unmarked graves. After the war, Graves Registration Service never found them. They're still there, somewhere along the Rhine. March 10, 1945, 0600 hours. Dawn revealed the damage, 3 pontoons destroyed. 4 treadway sections bent beyond repair, 50 feet of bridge effectively gone, needing complete reconstruction. But the anchors had held. The upstream sections remained intact. The engineers could rebuild. Pergrin surveyed the damage, calculated quickly. They'd lost 3 hours of work, plus reconstruction time, another 4 hours, 7 hours total. But dawn also brought reinforcements. A platoon from the 299th Engineer Combat Battalion arrived to augment manpower. Additional equipment from the 988th Treadway Bridge Company. And, critically, the East Bank team had finally secured the Erpel side enough to begin construction from that end. Building from both banks simultaneously would cut construction time by 40%. Start reconstruction, Pergrin ordered, and get the East Bank team building. We meet in the middle. By 0800 hours, reconstruction was complete. The bridge extended 300 feet from the West Bank again, back where they'd been before the debris strike. By 0900 hours, the East Bank team had 50 feet of bridge extending from the Erpel side. Progress accelerated. By 1000 hours, West Bank 400 feet, East Bank 100 feet. By 1100 hours, West Bank 500 feet, East Bank 150 feet. Then at 1130 hours, the Luftwaffe returned in force, 47 aircraft this time, 20 Ju-87 Stukas, 15 conventional bombers, Ju-88s and He-111s, 6 Arado R-234 jet bombers, Germany's newest aircraft, faster than any Allied fighter, and 6 Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighters flying top cover. The jets were terrifying. They approached at 400 miles per hour, too fast to track, nearly impossible to hit with anti-aircraft fire. But the Americans had concentrated overwhelming firepower at Remagen. By March 10th, there were 672 anti-aircraft weapons protecting the bridgehead, the largest concentration of anti-aircraft artillery in World War II. 90 90mm guns, hundreds of 40mm Bofors, dozens of quad 50 caliber machine gun mounts. When the Luftwaffe arrived, the sky erupted. Proximity-fused 90mm shells, detonating when they sensed aircraft nearby, filled the air with steel fragments. Streams of 40mm tracers arced upward, converging on targets. 50-caliber rounds stitched patterns across the sky. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar of guns firing, shells exploding, aircraft engines screaming. The engineers kept working. They had no choice. Stopping meant falling behind schedule. Above them, German aircraft fell. A Stuka disintegrated in mid-air, hit by a 90mm shell. A Ju-88 spun into the river, trailing smoke and flame. An Arado R-234, one of Hitler's wonder weapons, screamed over the bridge at 400 miles per hour, dropped 2 bombs. Both missed by 50 feet, detonating in the river. The water erupted, drenching engineers, knocking several off the bridge. All were recovered. By 12:30 hours, the Luftwaffe raid was over. 28 German aircraft destroyed, shot down by American anti-aircraft fire. 19 more damaged, limping back to bases in Germany. American casualties, 14 wounded, mostly from bomb fragments, and 1 aircraft that crashed into a building in Remagen. The bridge was intact. Construction continued. By 1400 hours on March 10th, West Bank 600 feet, East Bank 200 feet. Total remaining gap, 90 feet. The 2 sections could see each other now across the remaining gap. Engineers on both sides waved, shouted encouragement. But the final 90 feet would be the most dangerous section. The current was strongest in the middle of the river, moving at nearly 8 miles per hour. The depth was greatest, approximately 40 feet. The anchors had to be positioned with millimeter precision, or the pontoons would drift and the treadway sections wouldn't align. If alignment failed, the entire bridge failed. And German artillery observers on Erpel could see both sections converging. They knew what that meant. The bridge was about to close. German artillery fire intensified. Shells arriving every 60 seconds now. Pergrin positioned himself at suicide point on the West Bank section, personally directing the final connection. On the East Bank, Captain Moyer did the same. They communicated by radio, coordinating movements. Next pontoon drops in 3 minutes, Pergrin radioed. Copy that, Moyer responded. East Bank pontoon positions in 5. We'll connect in the middle. The West Bank team positioned their final pontoons, 3 of them spaced 12 feet apart. Treadway sections connected, locked with pins, 45 feet extending from the West Bank section into the gap. The East Bank team mirrored the operation, 3 pontoons, treadway sections extending 45 feet into the gap. The gap narrowed to 12 feet. 1 treadway section remained. That section had to be positioned perfectly, connecting both sides, supported by a single pontoon in the middle. German shells bracketed the gap. 1 hit 30 feet upstream. Shrapnel whistled across the water. Another hit 40 feet downstream. They were trying to hit the gap, destroy the connection before it could be made. Position the final pontoon, Pergrin ordered. 2 power utility boats, 1 from each bank, towed the final pontoon into position in the gap. The current was vicious here, fighting them. The boat engines screamed at full throttle. Engineers on both sides held anchor cables, fighting to stabilize the pontoon. "Drop anchors," Pergrin shouted. Kedge anchors splashed into the Rhine upstream, sank 40 feet to the riverbed. The cables went taut, pontoons straining against current and anchors. "Connect treadways." Engineers on both sides lowered the final treadway section onto the pontoon, positioned connector saddles, drove pins through aligned holes. The metallic clang of pins seating echoed across the river. "West Bank connection secure," an engineer shouted. "East Bank connection secure," another shouted, the final pin locked into place. The bridge was complete. At 17:10 hours on March 10, 1945, 32 hours and 40 minutes after construction began, the first tactical bridge across the Rhine was finished. 1,032 feet of steel treadway and rubber pontoons, spanning 890 feet of river moving at 7 miles per hour. Engineers on both banks erupted in exhausted cheers. Some collapsed where they stood, too tired to celebrate. Others wept, from exhaustion, from relief, from grief for the men who hadn't lived to see this moment. Pergrin allowed himself a tight smile. Then he keyed his radio. "Anderson, this is Pergrin. Bridge complete. Request immediate load test." "Copy that, Pergrin," Colonel Anderson responded. "Sherman tank en route. 5 minutes." The load test was critical. The bridge was designed to support 40 tons, Class 40 in Army terminology. An M4 Sherman tank weighed 33 tons. Theoretically, the bridge should hold it with margin to spare, but theory and reality diverged under combat conditions. At 17:20 hours, an M4 Sherman from the 14th Tank Battalion rolled onto the bridge from the west bank. Driver, Sergeant William Goodson. Tank Commander, Lieutenant Robert Franklin. The Sherman moved at 5 miles per hour, slow, careful. The bridge flexed under the load, pontoons settling deeper into the water, treadway sections bending slightly. Engineers held their breath, watching for signs of failure. Anchor cables went taut, straining. Pontoons submerged until only 12 inches of freeboard remained. Treadway sections bowed under weight but held. The Sherman reached the middle, the weakest point, farthest from both banks. The bridge sagged 6 inches. Engineers watched, calculating stress loads mentally. The Sherman kept moving, crossing the middle section, reaching the east bank side. The bridge rose slightly as weight shifted. At 17:27 hours, the Sherman touched down on the east bank. Engineers erupted in cheers again, louder this time. The bridge held. "Bridge is operational," Pergrin radioed to Anderson. "Open for traffic." Within minutes, a steady stream of vehicles began crossing. Jeeps with infantry squads, trucks carrying ammunition, 20,000 pounds per truck. More Shermans, 33 tons each, crossing at walking speed. M10 tank destroyers, 30 tons. Self-propelled artillery, 25 tons. The bridge flexed, sagged, recovered. It held. By nightfall on March 10th, 2,000 vehicles had crossed the 291st's bridge. By midnight, engineers erected signs at both ends. The longest tactical bridge built first across the Rhine, constructed by 291st Engineer Combat Battalion and the 998th Treadway Bridge Company. The sign didn't mention casualties. It didn't mention the 4 dead. Martinez, Thompson, Mitchell, DeLuca. It didn't mention the 35 wounded, some who would recover, some who would carry wounds for life. It didn't mention the 32 hours of artillery fire, the Luftwaffe attacks, the debris strike that nearly destroyed everything. But the men who built it remembered, every one of them. 2 miles upstream, the 51st Engineer Combat Battalion completed their heavy pontoon bridge 8 hours after the 291st finished. They'd started construction at 1600 hours on March 10th, building between Kripp and Linz. They finished at 1900 hours on March 11th, 27 hours of work. Though they'd started later, their bridge was 969 feet long, built using solid aluminum pontoons instead of inflatable rubber. Heavier, more durable, but slower to construct. They'd worked under similar conditions: German artillery, Luftwaffe attacks, vicious current. They'd lost 3 men killed, taken 19 wounded. Their bridge would be named the second tactical bridge across the Rhine. But Pergrin's bridge was first, and in military history, first matters. On March 12th, the Ludendorff Bridge was closed for emergency repairs. It had sagged 12 inches, cracks visible in every major structural member. Engineers working underneath it reported hearing metal groaning. the sound of impending catastrophic failure, all traffic diverted to the treadway and pontoon bridges. On March 17th, at 1500 hours, the Ludendorff Bridge surrendered to physics. With a sound like a cannon shot heard for miles, the main arch sheared. The entire center span, 4,240 tons of steel and concrete, collapsed into the Rhine in 1.3 seconds. 200 engineers were working on it. 28 died, crushed by falling steel, drowned in the icy current, swept away, never to be found. 63 were injured. 18 bodies were never recovered. Among the dead, Lieutenant Colonel H.D. Rust, executive officer of the 276th Engineer Combat Battalion. He'd survived D-Day at Omaha Beach. He'd survived the Battle of the Bulge. The bridge killed him. Downstream, on the 291st's Treadway Bridge, engineers stopped work and stood silent. They'd known the Ludendorff was failing. They'd heard engineers working on it describe the cracks, the groaning, the inevitable collapse. But seeing it happen, seeing the bridge that started everything collapse into twisted wreckage, hit them like artillery. Pergrin stood on the west bank, watching medics pull bodies from the water. His face was expressionless, but his hands clenched into fists. This was the cost. This was what happened when bridges failed. And this was why the 291st's bridge mattered. Because when the Ludendorff fell, traffic didn't stop. It kept flowing. Across the Treadway Bridge, across the pontoon bridge, across a third Bailey Bridge that had just been completed. The Rhine was crossed. Germany's last barrier was breached, and nothing was going to unbreach it. By March 18th, a fourth bridge, a Bailey Bridge, was operational at Remagen. Built by the 148th Engineer Combat Battalion in 48 hours. This bridge was 1,032 feet long, using modular steel panels that could be assembled quickly and support heavy loads. It was designed to replace the temporary treadway bridges once the bridgehead was fully secured. The Bailey Bridge would remain operational for months, eventually becoming the primary crossing point at Remagen. But for the critical first 10 days, March 9th through March 19th, Pergrin's Treadway Bridge carried the load. In those 10 days, 6 divisions crossed at Remagen, approximately 125,000 troops. The 9th Armored Division, which captured the original bridge. The 78th Infantry Division, which expanded the bridgehead. The 99th Infantry Division, the 2nd Infantry Division, the 7th Armored Division, the 3rd Armored Division. Each division required 500 tons of supplies per day. That's 3,000 tons daily across the bridges, plus vehicles, thousands of trucks, jeeps, tanks, artillery pieces, plus casualties being evacuated west, hundreds daily. All of it funneling through the bridges that engineers had built under fire. The bridgehead expanded relentlessly. By March 15th, 15 miles wide, 8 miles deep. By March 20th, 25 miles wide, 10 miles deep. By March 25th, 35 miles wide, 20 miles deep. German counterattacks intensified, but they were piecemeal, uncoordinated, doomed. Elements of the 11th Panzer Division attacked, destroyed. The 9th Panzer Division counterattacked, shattered. Panzer Lehr Division tried to push through, annihilated. German artillery fired thousands of rounds at the bridges, hitting them repeatedly, but never destroying them. The Luftwaffe flew 367 sorties against the bridges between March 7 and March 24th. American anti-aircraft gunners shot down 109 aircraft, 30% of all attackers. It became known as the greatest anti-aircraft artillery battle in American history. German frogmen attempted to plant mines under the bridges, intercepted by searchlights and machine gun fire. Floating mines sent downstream, intercepted by log booms. V-2 ballistic missiles fired at the bridges. Most missed. One hit Remagen town. None destroyed the bridges. Karl Girat's super-heavy mortars fired 600 mm shells, spectacular but ineffective. Everything failed. The bridges stood. and across them the American army poured into Germany's industrial heartland. The Rhine crossing at Remagen changed the strategic situation in Europe. On March 23, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery launched Operation Plunder, the massive set-piece crossing he'd planned for months. 22,000 tons of bridging equipment, 8,000 engineers, 4,000 artillery pieces firing a 4-hour opening bombardment. Airborne divisions dropped behind German lines. It was textbook, methodical, overwhelming. But it was also unnecessary. Remagen had already pierced the Rhine barrier. American forces were 35 miles deep into Germany, threatening to encircle the Ruhr. Eisenhower altered his entire strategy based on Remagen's success. Instead of Montgomery's crossing being the primary effort, it became secondary. The main effort shifted to exploiting the Remagen bridgehead. By March 25th, 3 American armored divisions had broken out. They cut the Ruhr-Frankfurt Autobahn. They encircled the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heart. Trapped inside, Army Group B, commanded by Field Marshal Walter Model. 300,000 German soldiers. Model fought for 2 weeks, then surrendered on April 18. 15 days later, on May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Historians still debate how much the Remagen crossing shortened the war. Some estimate 2 weeks, some estimate a month. Some say it was strategically decisive, that Germany lost the war the moment American engineers built those bridges. German military leaders acknowledged it. General Oberst Alfred Jodl, at his war crimes trial, the seizure of the Remagen Bridge definitely shortened the war. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. The capture of the bridge at Remagen was the climactic event of the war in the West. German General Günther Blumentritt. The Allied success at Remagen completely disrupted our planned withdrawal and defensive operations. The 291st Engineer Combat Battalion's bridge stood for 15 days before being replaced by the Bailey Bridge. In those 15 days, it carried 6 divisions across the Rhine. Thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of trucks, artillery pieces by the hundreds, and 125,000 American soldiers who would drive into the heart of Germany and end the Third Reich, all on a temporary bridge built in 32 hours by exhausted engineers under artillery fire. The final accounting: construction time, 32 hours, 40 minutes. Bridge length, 1,032 feet. Pontoons used, 86. Steel treadway sections, 86. Total bridge weight, 66 tons. Maximum load capacity, 40 tons, class 40. Vehicles crossed, first 10 days, approximately 15,000. Troops crossed, first 10 days, approximately 60,000. German artillery shells fired at construction site, estimated 300 plus. Direct hits on bridge during construction, 7. Luftwaffe sorties against bridge, 47. During construction phase. Enemy aircraft shot down, 28. American casualties, construction phase. 35 wounded, 4 killed. American casualties, maintenance phase, first 10 days, 12 wounded, 0 killed. Total American casualties associated with bridge, 47 wounded, 4 killed. Cost per foot of bridge, 1.2 casualties per 100 feet. Cost per casualty, 20 feet of bridge. Those numbers don't appear in official histories. But they're written in the scars every man who built that bridge carried for the rest of his life. Today, the Ludendorff Bridge towers still stand on both banks of the Rhine at Remagen. The western towers house the Peace Museum Bridge at Remagen. Inside, photographs document the bridge's capture, the construction of replacement bridges, the final collapse. There's a photograph from March 11, 1945, Colonel David Pergrin and his officers standing in front of the completed treadway bridge. They look exhausted. Uniforms filthy, faces gaunt, eyes hollow from 32 hours without sleep. But they're standing in front of 1,000 32 feet of bridge that shouldn't exist. A bridge built under conditions that military engineers still study in training courses. A bridge that doctrine said would take 16 hours under perfect conditions, and they built in 32 hours under the worst conditions imaginable. The plaque below the photograph reads, "The longest tactical bridge built first across the Rhine, constructed by the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion and the 998th Treadway Bridge Company, March 9–10, 1945. It doesn't mention Private First Class Robert Martinez, 22, from Texas, killed by the first direct hit. It doesn't mention Private Raymond Thompson, 19, from Indiana, vaporized at Suicide Point. It doesn't mention Corporal James Mitchell, 24, from Iowa, drowned when debris struck the bridge. It doesn't mention Private Anthony DeLuca, 21, from New York, swept away by the Rhine's current, never found. It doesn't mention the 35 wounded, some who recovered, some who carried shrapnel in their bodies for decades. It doesn't mention the engineers who worked 32 hours straight while shells bracketed them every 3 minutes. It doesn't mention the cold, 45-degree water that cramped muscles and threatened hypothermia. It doesn't mention the fear, knowing that the next shell might be the one with your name on it. But the men who built it remembered, every one of them, for the rest of their lives. Colonel David Pergrin survived the war. He returned to Pennsylvania, worked as a civil engineer, raised a family. He was honored, Bronze Star, Silver Star, Legion of Merit. But he rarely talked about the bridge. When asked, he would say, "We did what we were trained to do. We built bridges. That one happened to be under fire." He died in 2012, 3 months before his 95th birthday. At his funeral, 7 surviving members of the 291st attended, all in their late 80s or early 90s, all carrying memories of 32 hours in March 1945. They stood at the graveside and saluted. Not the formal military salute, the slow, deliberate salute of men who'd seen too much, lost too much, survived too much. One of them, Corporal Michael Russo, who'd rescued 2 drowning engineers, spoke briefly. "The colonel taught us that engineers don't quit," he said. "We built that bridge because quitting wasn't an option. Men died building it. But we finished it. And we'd do it again." He paused, looking at the casket. "Rest easy, Colonel. The bridge held." The Rhine flows past Remagen at 7 miles per hour, just as it did in March 1945. The towers still stand. The museum still displays the photographs. Tourists still visit, walk the grounds, read the plaques. Most don't know about the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion. Most don't know about the 32 hours of construction under fire. Most don't know about the 4 men who died building a temporary bridge that lasted 15 days. But the Rhine knows. The river that carried away Mitchell and DeLuca. The river that engineers fought for 32 hours. The river that American soldiers crossed to end the war. And somewhere, 40 miles downstream from Remagen, in an unmarked grave along the Rhine, 2 engineers still rest. Corporal James Mitchell, 24, from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Private Anthony DeLuca, 21, from Brooklyn, New York. They never saw the bridge completed. They never knew that it held. They never knew that their deaths helped end the war. But the Rhine knows, and the bridge, though long gone, remembers. Because on March 9, 1945, American combat engineers proved that impossibility is just a word. And sometimes, when the stakes are high enough, when the mission matters enough, when the men are skilled enough and brave enough, 32 hours is all you need to change history, even if it costs everything.